It's time to stitch out the mushroom house of our Hoppin' Down the Bunny Trail bench pillow. The mushroom home is on page 27. I have the background fabric as well as all the fabrics backed with fusible interfacing, and I have the batting. Now the directions do state that the mushroom stem and the interior fabrics do not need to be backed with interfacing. However, I did back all of mine. From the embellishment kit, I have the shape form, which is this stiff felt material that will be used for the 3D door. And then I'm using the Flexi Foam, which is a soft foam that will give the mushroom cap some dimension. So let's get started on our mushroom home. I've opened Embrilliance Essential Software and I need to bring in the file for the mushroom house. I can use the merge stitch file icon, but I like to just open the folder where I keep all of my files. I'm going to open the quilting bundle and I need the Easter 7 block by block and I need the 6 by 8. I will drag and drop that into the hoop. Now I can go back to the embroidery files folder and I will bring in the mushroom house. I will drag and drop it into the hoop. Now, as before, we need to make some changes to this file. The first change is to select the file and move it down. The directions say to align the bottom of the house or the door step, which is this part right here, a 1/2 inch from the bottom of the block. Now it's kind of hard to tell, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this box around the file like we have been doing. Again, that's not something that we need since we're doing the background quilting. So if I come to the right hand side, I am going to select that placement line, which is again not needed because of the way we're doing the quilting. And I will also select the second step, so I will hold my shift key down and select step 2. That is that box around the file, and I will hit delete on my keyboard. Now I can see that I need to bring this down just a little bit more, so I will select that file and just move it a couple of notches. Again, this distance between these two orange lines is a 1/4 inch, and I just need to make the bottom of this step approximately this far away from the inside. It doesn't have to be perfect. There will be that glitter grass that goes along the bottom, but we do want to bring it down just a little bit. And that's all we need to do as far as centering and moving this block. The only other changes I will make will be to the background quilting as I have in the other designs. I am going to select the tack down of the batting, hold my shift key down and select the placement of the fabric and hit delete on my keyboard. And the reason I take out those 2 steps is that I cut my batting to exactly the size of the placement line, and so the tack down stitch would not do me any good. And then the placement for the fabric is just a 1/4 inch outside the batting line, and so again our background fabric is large and that is a step that's not needed. Of course, this is totally optional and you can do all 5 steps of the background quilting, or you can skip those right at the machine. I will Command A on my Mac to select both designs. You can just draw a selection box around both. I am going to come up to this rotate left and rotate it so it fits better into my 9 by 14 inch hoop so I can save on stabilizer. Now I will come to File, Save Stitch File As, and name my design. I will save it into my combined files folder. I will add it to my USB and take to my machine.
So you can see I have my large hoop back in my machine, and I still have the sign block attached, and I did the carrot house. I took my hoop out and just finished up the little 3D door and the bunny, and I'm ready to do the mushroom house. Now I think I have enough space at the top of my hoop to put that instead of having to take this out. Now, when I brought my carrot house in, I brought it in and moved it all the way down to the bottom of the hoop. So I redid that because I just stitched out the door. And so I brought this carrot house back in and moved it all the way down as far as it could go. So what I'm going to do now before I delete this is I'm going to hit return. And I'm going to hit add. I will go to my USB, to my combined files, and I'm going to bring in the mushroom house. And I will hit set. Now you can see that it brings that mushroom house into the center, and so since that is the file I just brought in, it is selected. So I'm going to go to edit and move, and now I'm going to move it all the way to the top. And so you can see that there is enough room between the blocks. Now the fabric might overlap depending on, how I place it, but I should be okay stitching wise. I'm going to select OK. Now before I hit embroidery, I need to delete this because I've already stitched this out. I will select that and hit delete. And it asks me if I want to delete that pattern. I will say yes. Now I can go to embroidery, and I will be able to stitch this block out without having to unhoop and rehoop. So let's get this cute little mushroom house stitched out. So here is the placement line for the batting, and you can see that I have plenty of room, and it'll be good to stitch this at the top. So I will continue stitching this out. I just finished trimming the flexi foam, and I ran the next step, which is the fabric placement for the small mushroom. And I'm getting ready to place the fabric. But again, you can see how tiny that little line is as far as away from the mushroom cap. It's really not needed because our fabric, you can tell, is much larger. And so again, that's why sometimes I take out that fabric placement line, because it's just a tiny bit outside of the placement, or in this case, the flexi foam. When trimming this door to the mushroom house, it says to trim the sides and the top close to the stitching line and to leave the bottom a little bit longer. It says about 1/8 of an inch. There's going to be a little step, and it just says to leave this a little bit longer so that it won't pucker. So I cut that just a little bit longer. I'm getting ready to stitch the second satin outline of this little window on the mushroom house. And I just wanted to point out that that first satin stitching of the white will not cover the felt. It says that in the directions, but it might be easy to miss. And so when you do stitch that white outline, don't be nervous that there is still felt showing on the outside. We're getting ready to cover that right now. So the last thing we need to do for this block is to attach this little 3D door. And the directions call for taking the door and putting a piece of tape that we'll use in just a minute. And we need to line up this stitched line right here with this stitched line. And that's one reason to do it in a visible color so that you can see. So it says to put this down and to take 2 pins and put it right in the corner of that stitching, and then to put one, of course, at the top and one at the bottom. And it says to make sure the pins go straight down and not, in sideways, because that would make it shift. So straight down. Right now, I am on top of my wool pressing mat. So if I have this and I'm just going to put the pin right at the top of that and make sure that it's straight up and down and just push down. Do the same thing for the bottom. Put it in this corner. And then I'm going to kind of swivel and look underneath and poke that again straight down. And now they want you to turn the hoop over to see if those pins are coming out at the top of those. And mine look good. So I'm going to flip it back over. Give it one more look. Make sure they're straight down. And then I'm going to tape it in place. And then it says to double check and kind of lift this back to see if we are in line. And I'm pretty sure that I'm in line. And then they want you to do one more check. They want you to check 3 different times before stitching the store on. So the next thing it wants us to do is actually go to the machine. So let me get back to my machine and we will do our last check to see if the store is ready to stitch on. So I have my hoop in my machine, and I did add an extra piece of tape, and of course I took my pins out because my hoop is on my machine. And so now what they want us to do is unthread the needle. So I'm just going to pull the thread out of the needle, and it says with the presser foot lifted, I need to go forward 7 machine stitches. And that is kind of how when we skip a step and I use the down or the back arrow, now we're going to use these little plus and minus stitches. So I need to move ahead 7 stitches. So I am going to use the +1 and hit it 7 times. Then it says we need to check the needle alignment in the door. So in order to do that, it says to lower the needle and check, and I think it's right at the bottom of that satin stitching, right about where I had my little needle. So I am going to say that's good. So then I need to raise it. Now I need to move forward again to the middle of the door. Just, it doesn't say an exact amount. So I'm just going to hit 1 just until it looks like it's at the middle. And then drop the needle again and make sure that it is right on that stitching. And it is right on that stitching. So that's good. And then I need to lift the needle again. And then it says to go to the bottom of the door. So I'm going to, again, just use my +1 and go over until it looks like it's at the bottom of that door. I think maybe 1 more. And put my needle down. And it looks like it's right in that corner. So I think that I'm about as aligned. I don't see how I could get any more aligned. So I am going to call that good. And now I'm going to raise my needle. And I need to get back because now that we have forwarded through some of these steps, I need to get back to the very beginning of this step. So in order to get back, since I've gone through, several stitches, I need to hit this back arrow. Right now, I think you can see that there is just a little line that's going to secure our door. And if I go back, I'm still at that line, but you heard my hoop move and it is back to the top of the door. So it's ready to stitch this out. So now I need to not forget to thread my needle because I unthreaded it. So I will just hit my needle threader. And just because I am going to lower my speed to 350, which is the lowest, I probably don't really need to do that. So now I need to stitch. Looks like it's going to stitch right on that line. So let's stitch this down.
Okay. Okay, let's see how this looked, because if for some reason it got off or it looks like it's not close, you could always unpick that. So it looks like my stitches look like where they are supposed to be. I'm going to trim this little tiny piece right here. I'm going to open it, and it's pretty good. I can see the little stitching under here, but I think I'm going to call that good. And I'm sure that I have to trim. Let me go read the directions. It's going to do a satin stitch, and I'm sure I have to trim this, but let me double check. Okay, so yes, I'm just going to trim one at a time. I'm about as close. I don't think I can get much better. Again, when I open the door, I can kind of see that brown stitching from underneath, but I think by the time the satin stitching would hopefully cover that. Otherwise, I could always unpick that, but I'm actually not too concerned about that. So I am going to trim this. And of course, you wouldn't trim this unless you were happy with the placement. So I'm hoping that we're good. I guess we'll find out. And it says trim close to the stitching. So let's see if this worked. All right, so I have my satin stitching to do. Okay, so it looks pretty good. I did have a little tiny bit to trim right here that didn't get covered in the satin stitching. I guess I didn't trim it quite close enough at this top, but you know what? Considering, I think it looks pretty good. Let me pull this out. I think that looks pretty good. And yep, the stitching did, when I open it, now I can't see that. I could see that before, but the satin stitching, of course, was wider, so it covered that up. It looks like I have a few little things to trim. But I think that's cute. And it's a little door, and you can see the little chick. I think that looks great. So I am super happy with that. Now we are done with the mushroom house. Now, by the time you see the video for the mushroom house, I will already have these other blocks done, but I just wanted to show you again how I hoop. So I have the second block. Here's the first block up here. And then I just moved my stabilizer down and put that just down just so that's, I waste as least as possible. Again, had room to do both of these in my larger hoop. And I still have the rest of my muslin, which is coming to the end of a strip or roll of stabilizer when I use regular stabilizer. And I still have that attached. So now what I will do is take this out, and I will just trim, because we're going to, of course, cut this block to size, and it's not going to be any wider than this. In fact, we're going to cut the muslin or stabilizer out of the seam allowance. And so I can just cut this just right along that stitching. So now I think I have enough to do 2 more blocks, it looks like, with this one piece of muslin or stabilizer. Now for the mushroom block, there is a few jump stitches that I need to trim on this little chick, and then we're done with that. But that's how I save on stabilizer. So I started taking my basting out, but before I finish taking that and cutting mine to size, I do want to make a note that if you are not using the Kimberbell orange pop rulers, where it's, the perfect size for their blocks, and you are just using a regular ruler,
you might want to leave this basting in. Of course, it needs to be pressed, and I would use this as a guideline. Now, technically or theoretically, this should be the trimming line, but you can see, for example, how this bottom of this house is pulled up a little bit, and it might pull in on the sides. So what you would need to do is cut according to the directions, let's say on the bottom with just a regular ruler. But before cutting the top, or vice versa, you would need to measure to make sure that from your cut line to your second cut line on top measures, in this case, 8.5 inches. If it doesn't, then you need to measure 8.5 inches and cut, and not go by the stitching. Same on the sides. These are supposed to measure 6.5 inches wide. So after, let's say you get the top and the bottom cut to 8.5 inches, I would, square it up, because sometimes they're not even. They might pull in a bit. Cut one side, and before you cut the second side, measure the 6.5 and then cut. Or before cutting, measure, and if it needs to maybe go outside both a little bit, just make sure your final cut measurement is, in this case, 6.5 by 8.5. And again, don't always just assume you can cut right on the basting line. Because of things like this where it has pulled in, you might end up being too short. And I say that if you are working on Kimberbell and plan to do more, the orange pop rulers are definitely worth the investment. All right, so I'm going to finish this up and get this pressed and ready to cut. I'm ready to cut this mushroom house block, and I wanted to point out again that you can't always go by the basting stitches, which most of the time, of course, I take out, because the quilting sometimes pulls in. And you can see on this house how you can actually see the batting kind of pulls up. Remember, this was where we cut this little piece for the door. We left it longer because they said it might pull, and it did pull. If you look on the back, you can see the batting does kind of go up. And again, that's why you can't always cut just on those placement lines or that tack down line of the fabric. And even, I think even the top pulled. So I am going to center this on the back, because this again doesn't have any quilting into the seam allowance. So let's get this cut. And so what I'm going to do, since you can see that the batting is not straight, I am measuring 1/4 inch from the edges that haven't pulled in. And you can see that that lines up good. And the directions also say that the bottom of this little door step should be 1/2 inch. And you can tell that from the center, it's not quite 1/2 inch, but from each of the edges, it measures. Again, you can kind of see that's arched a little bit. So I am going to measure the 1/4 inch seam allowance from the bottom of the batting. So let's get this cut.